Hey, photographers and community photographer family. So you want to create product photographs, or maybe you want to photograph a piece of artwork like we have here today. And this process can seem deceivingly simple because you're just shooting a still life. You're shooting an object sitting before you. That should be pretty simple. But what happens when you need to create perfect lighting, perfect color tone, perfect texture, and catalog this product in its reality and with color perfection? I want to show you today the tools and the techniques how to do it. So in the studio today, we're photographing a piece of art by a local artist, Nancy Boswell. And so we get a lot of artists coming to us to catalog photos, digital copies of their artwork here in this local artist community that our studio's in. We have a couple of shooting bays here, a nice big one, which is actually covered up with a different setup right now, and then this small shooting bay. So this might be a lot like what you have at home, just a small room, a small space to photograph in. And I want to show you how you can control the light in that kind of space, or anywhere really. So the techniques, the tools we're going to look at are great for product photography. You can also let this spill over into really capturing perfect headshots and portraits as well. So one of the tools we'll be using today, because we're going to be really specific with this piece of artwork, of creating an image that is exact in color science, that has all the correct hues, all the full tonality of blues and greens and everything that's in the portrait preserved. And so we're going to be using this color checker passport photo. This is the new version that has the color as well as the gray card and exposure white card in it. So we'll be using that a little bit. We'll also be using a tape measure for some important reasons, to make sure we have a great ratio of the angle of the portrait, no distortion. We're using a tripod today. We're using a couple of different lights, constant lights, and let me just walk you through the whole thought process. The first thing to consider when you're about to shoot, especially a large flat object like this, you want the whole thing in focus, and you don't want any distortion. So I'm making a couple important decisions in regards to that. First, my lens choice. Today I'm using a 55mm prime. This is a Zeiss Sony lens. And so anything that's over a 35mm, but close to it, a 50mm, a 55mm in this case, for me is really an ideal lens to shoot something like this for a couple reasons. If you get 35mm or under, you're going to create some distortion, and so you're gonna lose the flatness and the sort of your human perspective on an object like this, and start to twist it, manipulate it. If you go further, like an 85mm beyond that, maybe you have a 105mm, that is better than going wide angle because it's less obvious distortion, but it does compress your image a lot. You're gonna have to be further away, you risk more camera shake, and you are compressing the image, so it's not as natural looking or mimicking the human eye, which is what we want this to look like when it's archived. So that 55mm is going to give me a true sort of what we call in portrait world a flattering vision of the portrait. And then I'm also going to go ahead and mount it here in an easel. So if you don't have an easel, that's fine. You can rest this on a chair, rest it on a stool, put something behind it to rest it against. If you don't have an easel that you can just clamp in your piece of artwork there, your object, you can use a clamp like this to clip it on to whatever you're making do with, but don't use a clamp that has a real high spring-loaded capacity. It's going to crush the painting. Instead, I would use a ratcheted clamp like this, where you can just put a little bit of gentle pressure on it and hold it against your easel or whatever object you have that doesn't have a clamp at the top. But what the easel really allows me to do is to clamp in the painting and then lean the easel up so that I can use a level and make sure that the painting is actually straight. If your easel is leaning backwards, of course you can always put your camera in the tripod and angle it towards your painting. But then you have to do all that stuff from high school math, right? You have to calculate your triangle, figure out the hypotenuse, and make sure everything is parallel, because ultimately we want this camera, no matter which way the painting is shifted, we want this camera to remain parallel to it and get a perfectly straight on view of the painting, so everything's in focus. So for me, it's much easier to just lean the painting up and make sure it's buckled in so it's not going to fall off and destroy this piece of artwork. When I'm handling paintings, I always like to use white glove service, so just some simple cotton gloves. I want to make sure that the oils on my hands are not going to show up when I return this to the artist, especially a painting like this that was just finished today. So we're going to put that on here, we'll buckle it in. You can use a level to make sure everything's just perfect. And you'll notice I'm putting it in, even though this is a painting meant to hang vertically, the easiest way to photograph on your tripod is with your camera in horizontal mode. And of course, you can always turn your digital file and camera when you're cropping and editing later. So I'm always going to photograph my paintings like this in horizontal aspect, just like I would for headshots. I always shoot headshots also in horizontal because you can always crop in, but it gives you more options. This, I'm going to fill my whole frame with it. And then not cropping anything off the sides, and that's going to give me the best resolution possible. That's key when we're photographing products, or in this case paintings, to be high quality archived versions. We want to have all the resolution that we can get out of our cameras. So to keep my easel at that perfect upright 90-degree angle without it tipping forward and destroying the art, I'm going to just shift an apple box under the leg here, and then I'm using a sandbag to put on top of that and hold it in place. The next thing I'm going to do is actually measure from the middle of my painting as if I were just coming down and looking at it, not at an angle, but straight on and to the floor. And that's going to give me an idea of, we got about 44 inches. That would just give me a general idea, and I'll be as specific as possible how high up the painting is. I'm going to measure to the center of my lens down to the floor and make sure that that lens is at the exact same height in the middle of the painting. So I'm going to go from the floor up to the camera lens and make sure that gives me 44 inches as well. I'm using the Peak Design travel tripod today. You don't need this fancy or expensive of a tripod in the studio. You can get something kind of bigger and bulkier that's less expensive. But I just like having one tripod that suits every use I need. So the great thing about the Peak Design travel tripod, it's the smallest, lightest one out there, but extremely sturdy and useful in the studio as well. So the great thing is I'll be able to hook in my camera with your traditional Arca Swiss style base plate, tripod plate, and it comes with its own plate that you can put on your camera, but also my Spider holster Arca Swiss plate that's always on my camera will fit right in there as well. The travel tripod has all the features you need. So we've got a great bubble level here. I will just use that to make sure that our tripod is nice and level and therefore parallel with our painting. And then I'll snap the camera in and hit the locking mechanism so that everything's nice and tight, ready to go. The most important part of a photograph like this is getting the color and lighting just right. So we're going to light it intentionally. We're not going to just have ambient light that might be coming from any direction. We need to show the texture and color perfectly. We also don't want any kind of shadows, even minor shadows that would come from a canvas like this, from the little bumps and paint blotches on the canvas. If you have a light too far to one side or imbalanced, then you're going to literally see stray shadows in your picture cast by those imperfections. So a light like this, a constant light, allows me to see what I'm going to get before I take the shot. So this is the Luxley Orchestra series. I have this viola. We also have two larger cello units. You can watch a review on these on our channel. The amazing thing is that these are completely controlled by an app. They're very smart. I can actually change the color. And so although I have control over all of that, I'm going to put them all at just a constant 5600 Kelvin temperature today. And we're going to measure that color temperature using my X-Rite color checker passport and make sure that everything is blended together just perfectly. The other awesome thing about the Luxley Orchestra Series constant lights, LEDs, is that the batteries last forever. I have so much control, but once I turn these on, I'll actually, instead of using them as a bare bulb, of course we can control the intensity here as well, but instead of using these as just a bare bulb light, which would be very harsh on the subject, on the painting, I'll actually put these in softboxes. I love these Westcott Apollo softboxes because they open umbrella style and you can literally mount them with any lights. You don't have to have any speed rings or special adapters. Put them on anything, just like you would an umbrella on an umbrella stand. And now I can make these Luxley constant lights as big of a light source as I want just by putting them in here. I'll use on this side a Westcott Apollo strip box. Often I'll use this for the rim light behind a headshot portrait's head, but in this case I'm going to turn it on its side to match the horizontal position of my subject, the painting. And when I turn it towards the painting, I'm not going to shoot it directly at the canvas. Instead, I'm going to just feather it past a little bit. And you can imagine the light emitting out of this softbox. The most intense and direct light comes through the middle, and I don't want to cause any glare or harsh light on the canvas. So I'm going to move this light far over to the side. I'm going to shoot it a little bit past the canvas, and only the softer indirect rays from this softbox will end up hitting the canvas and giving it a nice textured look where I can see the real texture of the canvas instead of causing any undesired shadows. All right, the same thing on this side. I have a giant Apollo softbox from Westcott. And so turning my light on in here, I always press the wrong button first. There's my second one. This is going to be really my fill light. So I want to make sure there's a light coming from this side. I usually have it closer to camera and filling in any shadows that my main light might cause, any harsh shadows. So I can take this, keep it a little closer to camera, and then back it off just a little bit because the distance of that light from the canvas will also diminish it a little bit, make it a little less extreme. Now, crucially, before I take my final color measurement in camera, we got to kill any ambient lights around here. The only light on the painting is going to be my controlled lighting. So let's kill the ambient lights. I've got overhead lights. I literally have a canned light that's directly facing, and you can see the shadows here, directly shining on the canvas. It's a different color of light. It's a different quality of light. So we're going to kill all of these, and then I'll show you how once they're gone, we can actually measure the color temperature of the light here that's left from my Luxley LED lights. Now, if I look through my camera with these lights off, the canvas here is virtually in the dark. All of the light for the exposure of my picture is coming from the artificial lighting. All right, so with these lights on, we're going to take a measurement. You can watch my tutorial on how to take a perfect color measurement from your X-Rite color checker passport. This is the Passport 2 that has both the gray card and the color science inside. So I'll use this before any shoot just so I have perfect color balance that doesn't necessarily even need to be edited later. Do it ahead of time. You save yourself a lot of time, which is your most precious resource, okay? So to do this, I'm just going to take a reading first of my exposure and literally looking at the card, get a perfect exposure. All right, once that is achieved, then I can go in to my color balance and set the gray scale so I have a custom white balance. Perfect. And now, with that in mind, I want to make sure that the light is falling on my card. The same light that will be falling on the portrait falls on the card as I also photograph it for color science. Great. All right, let's take the final picture. The wonderful thing about my Sony a7R III is not only the resolution for pictures like this, but also I've got my level built in so I can see that my portrait is level, my camera is level, And I can of course see that we're getting the right kind of color that we want under our new measurements from the constant lights. So from right there, I'm going to fill my frame with the picture, and I'm going to shoot no lower than f2.8. There's no reason to go lower on my f-stop, which would risk having some part of the picture fall out of focus. And then I can stand to go a little bit lower. Since I'm on a tripod, I can go lower on my exposure time, my shutter speed, and I'm going to always keep my ISO as low as possible. These cameras hold up really great even in low light, and they have very low grain even at high ISOs. But generally I'm going to keep this picture around 400 ISO, and if my exposure from the lights will allow it. If I see any glare on the canvas at all, reflection from my light that's flaring back into the camera and creating sort of a glossiness, then all I'm going to do is just reach in here and adjust my light further away from my camera, just remembering that light basically bounces in straight lines like a pool ball. So if you're playing pool, you want that light to bounce away from your camera and not into your camera lens. Now we've got a great reflection, glare-free image, and so we're going to take a couple snaps. And one of those should be our keeper. In summary, if you want to create a photo that has perfect lighting, color, and something like this painting that's actually going to be archived, or if you're just shooting a portrait subject and you want those skin tones to be perfect, you want those bridesmaids' dresses to resemble the actual colors that that bride chose for her wedding, you want to make sure of a couple things. In this case, that you're keeping your camera parallel and at the same height as your subject, so everything is non-distorted and in focus. You want to use something like X-Rite Color Checker Passport and make sure that you have actually recorded into your camera perfect color. And you can use lighting. Kill all the ambient lighting that's getting in the way and bring in something like the Luxley constant lights that you can use to reshape and add exactly the right tone to your subject. I hope all of that helped. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions and comments below. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this, and we'll be bringing more tutorials, more answers to your questions your way soon. Thank you from me, Philip Bloom, and from the Community Photographer family. We'll talk to you next time.